A cat stalks through the ruins of the Roman Forum, a ghost from an empire of marble and legionaries. We often picture ancient Rome as a world of eagles, wolves, and gladiators, but what about the felines that shared its streets? The truth about Roman cats is a story shrouded in mystery and myth, and we are going to uncover it all. You will discover the complete and surprising reality of their lives, from their sacred roles to their brutal fate in the arena. We will explore why these creatures were never worshipped like in Egypt and what secret purpose they served in the legions. What is the most surprising role you think a cat could have played in the ancient world? To understand the Roman cat, we must first look to the banks of the Nile. In Egypt, the feline was not merely a pet, it was a divine entity. The goddess Bastet, depicted with the head of a cat, presided over the home, fertility, and protection. To harm a cat was not just a crime, it was sacrilege, an offense against the gods themselves. Historical accounts describe entire households plunged into mourning at the death of a family cat, with the creatures mummified and laid to rest with more care than many humans received. This was a civilization that literally worshipped the ground a cat walked on, and this cultural phenomenon did not exist in a vacuum. Rome, through its expanding trade networks and eventual conquest of Egypt, was acutely aware of this feline veneration. They saw the temples, they heard the stories, they witnessed the rituals. So why did this profound reverence not simply transfer over to Roman culture? Why did the cat, so divine in Egypt, become something entirely different in Rome? The answer lies in the fundamental differences between these two empires. The Roman worldview was intensely pragmatic. They admired Egyptian art and architecture. They imported Egyptian obelisks and cults, but their relationship with the animal kingdom was defined by utility. An animal's value was measured by what it could do for the state, the army, or the household. So when the cat arrived on Roman shores, it was not as a goddess, but as a new kind of tool. This set the stage for a relationship that was far more complex and in many ways far more revealing of the Roman character itself. So how did this new tool first arrive on Italian soil? The earliest concrete evidence places cats in Etruscan communities around 500 BC, well before Rome became an empire. These were not the sleek creatures of Egyptian art, but practical arrivals, likely stowing away on Greek trading vessels that crisscrossed the Mediterranean. These ships were plagued by rodents, and a cat was the perfect self-sufficient solution to a very old problem. But a second, more direct route opened after Rome annexed Egypt. With legions and merchants flowing back to the capital, they brought more than just grain and treasure. They brought a living, breathing method of pest control. The initial Roman perception of the cat was therefore deeply pragmatic. They were not exotic pets for the wealthy, nor were they immediately seen as divine. They were working animals valued for a single critical skill, their unmatched ability to hunt. An early depiction on a wine jug from the 4th century BC shows a cat intently watching a bird, a simple scene that speaks volumes. This was not a portrait of a god, but a documentation of a useful behavior. Some of the most telling archaeological evidence comes from Roman military outposts along the frontiers. Excavations have uncovered cat bones and even small paw prints preserved in drying roof tiles, suggesting these creatures were a common presence among the legionaries. They were the silent guardians of the grain stores, protecting the vital food supply from rats and mice. Imagine a soldier on the damp border of Hadrian's Wall, far from home, finding a moment of quiet companionship with a cat curled by the barracks hearth. This was the reality of the first Roman cats. They were unsung heroes of logistics and domestic life, their worth measured not in prayers, but in the grain they saved from ruin. But what exactly was this creature padding through Roman streets? The term Roman cat is deceptively simple, for it describes not one animal, but a blurring of worlds. The primary feline in the Roman household was Felis catus, the domestic cat we know today, an import that arrived on those trading ships. Yet Italy was already home to its own native feline, the European wildcat. This was a different beast entirely, a fierce and solitary hunter of the forests, avoiding human contact at all costs. So you had two distinct species living in close proximity, the tame import and the untamable native. This leads to a fascinating and almost certain reality, hybridization. On the fringes of towns and villages where human settlements met the wilderness, these two types of cats would have met and mingled. The genetic lines between the docile grain silo mouser and the fierce woodland predator would have frequently blurred. The average Roman probably did not make a sharp scientific distinction. A cat was a cat, but the creature curled by their fire likely carried a trace of the wild in its blood, a living reminder of the untamed forests that still pressed in at the edges of their ordered world. This genetic mingling meant the Roman cat was never a purely domestic animal in the way we might think of it today. It was a more robust, perhaps more independent creature, a product of two very different feline legacies converging under the banner of a single empire. This economic reality forged the cat's primary identity in Rome, that of a living, breathing pest control device. The empire ran on grain, vast shipments from Egypt and North Africa that fed the sprawling metropolis of Rome itself. But where there was grain, there were rats and mice in almost unimaginable numbers. These vermin were not just a nuisance, they were a direct threat to the food security of 1 million people and the stability of the legions. In the massive state-run Horia, the granaries that lined the Tiber River, the problem was constant. A single infestation could destroy tons of wheat, leading to shortages, skyrocketing prices, and civil unrest. This is where the cat found its most critical occupation. Unlike a dog that needed to be trained or a human guard who could be bribed, the cat came pre-programmed with an insatiable hunting instinct. It was a self-replicating, self-motivated workforce that asked for nothing more than a place to hunt and perhaps a bit of shelter. They were the silent, efficient guardians of Rome's most vital resource. The same logic applied on a smaller scale across the empire. In the cramped multi-story apartment buildings known as insulae, where poor citizens lived in squalid conditions, rodents were a daily plague. A family might not be able to afford elaborate traps or poisons, but they could always tolerate a stray cat lurking in the shadows. The cat provided a free, constant, and highly effective service. Even on the merchant ships that were the lifeblood of Roman trade, cats were essential crew members. They patrolled the dark, cramped holds, protecting the cargo and the ship's own food supplies from being devoured during long voyages. Other animals were sometimes used for similar purposes. Ferrets and weasels are also skilled hunters, but they lack the cat's unique combination of traits. A ferret is more difficult to control, more prone to biting, and cannot climb with the same agility to reach rodents in high rafters or ship rigging. The cat was the superior tool for the job, a perfectly evolved solution to a problem that plagued an entire civilization. Its value was not measured in sentiment, but in the tons of grain saved and the diseases prevented. This indispensable utility is why cats were not just tolerated, but actively encouraged to thrive in the bustling, chaotic ecosystem of a Roman city. This independent nature of the Roman cat, so essential for its work, began to shape how people saw its very soul. While the Romans never built temples to a cat-headed goddess, they did weave felines into their spiritual world view in subtle and telling ways. The cat was not a god, but it was not a common beast of burden either. Its most powerful association was with the concept of liberty itself. The goddess Libertas, the personification of freedom, was sometimes depicted with a cat at her feet. This was not a random choice. The cat, with its refusal to be commanded like a dog and its untamable spirit, was the perfect living symbol of personal independence. It answered to no master, a creature that lived by its own rules even within the walls of a human home. This symbolic link reveals a deep Roman admiration for the feline character. They respected what they could not fully control. There is also evidence linking cats to Diana, the virgin goddess of the hunt and the wild. As a fierce, solitary hunter who roamed the forests, Diana embodied a similar kind of untamed power. The cat, whether the domestic mouser or its wild cousin, was a miniature reflection of her domain, a master hunter operating in the shadows of both the city and the wilderness. So the Roman cat occupied a unique spiritual niche. It was a symbol, not a deity. It represented desirable human qualities like freedom and self-reliance, rather than acting as a vessel for a divine presence. This is a profound cultural difference. The Egyptians worshipped the cat as a god. The Romans admired the cat as a kind of furry philosopher, a four-legged testament to the virtues of liberty. They saw in its eyes a reflection of their own cherished ideals, making it a respected and even revered part of their world without ever falling to their knees in prayer. This independent spirit, so admired in the light of day, took on a more sinister hue after dark. The Roman night was a realm of shadows and uncertainty, and the cat, a creature of perfect silence and nocturnal prowess, became a natural vessel for superstition. Its piercing eyes glowing in the darkness, its sudden, fluid movements, all suggested a creature moving between worlds. For the average Roman, a cat crossing one's path was not a trivial event. Many saw it as a potent omen, though whether it was good or bad often depended on the context and the observer's own fears. For a soldier on the eve of battle, such an encounter might be interpreted as a warning of stealthy enemies or hidden dangers. For a merchant heading to the forum, it could signal unexpected twists of fortune, for better or for worse. The cat's connection to the underworld was almost inevitable. Its ability to see in the dark and its silent comings and goings linked it to the realm of spirits and the unknown. Some believe that a cat's appearance in a dream was a message from the dead, a cryptic communication from ancestors or lost loved ones. This association with mystery made the cat a common figure in the practices of magic and divination. A sorceress or saga might use a cat's bone in a ritual or interpret its behavior to foretell the future. Yet even here, the cat was not seen as inherently evil. It was a powerful, neutral force, a key that could unlock secrets, demanding respect rather than worship or fear. How would you interpret a black cat darting across your path on a moonless night? For a Roman, the answer was never simple, caught between seeing a symbol of pure liberty and a possible messenger of fate. This deep-seated ambiguity, this blend of respect and wariness, made the cat a truly unique figure in the Roman mind, an everyday creature that carried the weight of the entire spirit world on its quiet, prowling shoulders. The same cat that stalked the grain stores and haunted the night also prowled its way into the libraries of Rome. For a creature to appear in the pages of Roman literature, it had to be a noticeable, integrated part of the social fabric, and the cat certainly was. We find these animals not in epic poems about gods and heroes, but in the more personal, observational works that give us a true feel for daily life. The naturalist Pliny the Elder, in his massive encyclopedia of the natural world, makes a brief but telling note on cats. He names them and then immediately defines them by their primary function, noting their relentless drive to hunt down mice. This is not a description of a pet, but of a specialized worker, a biological tool perfectly designed for a specific task. His writing captures the standard pragmatic Roman view, seeing the animal for what it does, not for what it symbolizes. But then we turn to the poets, who always look for deeper meaning in the world around them. A wonderful and sadly anonymous piece of Latin verse survives, a simple epitaph for a beloved cat. The poem is written from the perspective of a young girl mourning her stolen companion. It reads, "My quiet, clean, delightful cat, my pet, my dear, who would with gentle hand stroke away your hunger with morsels at the table, and in your lap hold you while you slept, enticing little mice with clever, hopping steps." This is a voice filled with genuine affection. The poet highlights the cat's cleanliness and its quiet companionship, a stark contrast to the noisy, messy world of a Roman household. The girl's grief feels real and personal, proving that even if the culture did not worship cats, individuals certainly loved them. This small poem is a powerful correction to any idea that Romans were cold toward these animals. It shows us a cat not as a pest control agent or a symbol of liberty, but as a cherished friend, a source of comfort in a child's life. The literary cat, therefore, gives us a double vision. We see the public utilitarian creature described by Pliny, and we see the private, beloved companion mourned in poetry. Both are true, and together, they complete the portrait of an animal that was woven into the very heart of Roman existence, from the granary to the little girl's lap. A mosaic floor in a Pompeian entryway delivers one of the most direct glimpses of a Roman cat. Beneath the famous Latin warning, "Cave Canem, beware of the dog," a chained mastiff bares its teeth. But look closer, tucked into the corner of the same mosaic, a different animal is captured mid-stride. A sleek striped cat is frozen in time, its body low to the ground, its attention entirely focused on some unseen prey. It is not part of the warning, it is simply there, a living detail of the household the artist chose to include. This cat is not a decorative fantasy, it is a working resident, immortalized in stone while going about its daily business of hunting. This is the tangible proof archaeology offers us, not from bones but from art. In the frescoed gardens of other villas, cats appear again, often stalking birds amidst lush painted foliage. They are rendered with a keen, observant eye for their anatomy and behavior, their slender forms and intense focus captured perfectly. These are not the symbolic lions of power or the mythical beasts of legend. They are recognizably the cats that share these homes. So what do these artistic cameos truly tell us? They show cats as integrated, unremarkable parts of the domestic scene. They were not posed on cushions like pampered pets, nor were they elevated to central subjects of veneration. They were the background actors in the drama of daily life, valued enough to be included in the family's permanent decor, yet still portrayed in their essential role as hunters. Their presence in art confirms their physical presence in the home, not as exotic curiosities, but as familiar creatures padding from the garden to the atrium, a silent, furry thread woven into the fabric of Roman domesticity. But the art and poetry of Rome can only tell us so much. For a more unflinching truth, we must turn to the silent testimony of the bones themselves. Across the empire, from the heart of Rome to the farthest military forts, archaeologists have unearthed the skeletal remains of these ancient cats. These faunal remains are like a forensic report, offering hard data on how these animals truly lived and died. The bones reveal creatures slightly larger and more robust than many modern domestic cats, a testament to that hybrid vigor born from mixing with their wild European cousins. Their skeletons show the signs of a tough, active life, healed fractures and worn teeth that speak of constant scrapping, climbing, and hunting. Their diet, analyzed through chemical isotopes in the bones, was what we would expect: a mix of rodents, scraps from human settlements, and the occasional bird or fish. This was not a life of pampered luxury for most. It was a daily grind for survival. Yet within this general picture of hardship, there are poignant, startling exceptions that complicate the story. The most telling evidence comes not from how these cats lived, but from how they were treated in death. In rubbish pits and abandoned wells, cat skeletons are found mixed with food waste and broken pottery, discarded casually like any other piece of refuse. This was the fate of countless street cats and working mousers, their utility ended, their bodies forgotten. But then in quiet corners of settlements and even in formal cemeteries, we find something entirely different. A complete cat skeleton, carefully laid in a small grave, sometimes accompanied by a single pottery vessel or placed near a human burial. These were not accidental deposits. These were intentional, respectful burials. What does this mean? It means that while Roman society at large viewed the cat as a utilitarian creature, individual Romans clearly formed profound, personal bonds with them. Someone took the time to dig a grave, someone gently placed the animal in its final resting position, someone perhaps felt a genuine sense of loss. This forensic evidence draws a clear line between the public concept of the cat and the private reality. For the state, it was a biological tool for pest control. For the lonely soldier on the frontier or the child in a bustling city, it could be a quiet companion, a living creature whose death warranted a moment of care and respect. The bones force us to acknowledge this duality, a world where an animal could be both disposable labor and a beloved friend. So we arrive at the central, haunting question. Were these creatures, these symbols and workers, ever truly pets in the Roman world? The answer is not a simple yes or no, but a spectrum of affection revealed in the most intimate corners of their lives. Consider the literary evidence. That anonymous poem for a stolen cat is a powerful testament to personal love. The girl's grief is not for a broken tool, but for a quiet companion who slept in her lap. This is not an isolated case. In Pompeii, a piece of graffiti carved into a wall shows a child's drawing of a cat, a simple, heartfelt sketch that speaks of familiarity and fond observation. Then there are the burial sites, those quiet graves where a single cat was laid to rest with care. These are not the actions of a society that views an animal as mere property. There are the actions of individuals who felt a bond, who experienced a sense of loss that demanded a respectful farewell. This is the evidence for companionship, and it is compelling. It proves that the emotional capacity to love a cat existed in the Roman heart, yet we must balance this with the overwhelming evidence against a widespread pet culture. Look at the art. Dogs are shown on couches, birds in ornate cages. Even pet monkeys are depicted as cherished companions of the wealthy. Cats, by contrast, are almost always shown in action, hunting in a garden or prowling a mosaic floor. They are part of the household scenery, not the center of it. There were no shops selling collars for cats, no specialized veterinarians, no philosophical essays on the joys of feline friendship. The Roman relationship with dogs was often one of clear utility, too, guarding homes or hunting game, but it was also layered with deep sentiment. Epitaphs for faithful hounds are common. For the cat, that sentiment was rarer, more private, and almost never formalized. So what is the final verdict? Some Romans, without a doubt, kept cats as cherished companions. A soldier, a child, a lonely widow, they could all find solace in a creature that offered quiet company without demanding obedience. But this was the exception, not the rule. For most, the cat remained a respected partner in the business of daily survival, a superior mouser that might also curl up by the fire. It was a relationship built on mutual benefit that could, in the right circumstances, blossom into genuine affection. The Roman cat lived in the space between a working animal and a friend, its status in the home forever defined by the soft, persistent purr of its independence. The same cat whose gentle purr comforted a child could, in death, serve one final, practical purpose. This duality reveals a stark reality where affection never precluded utility. Roman pragmatism extended even to the bodies of these creatures, weaving their physical remains into the fabric of daily life. The soft, fine fur of a cat was a valuable material. While we lack explicit inventories listing cat skin gloves, we know that any small, supple pelt was prized for making winter clothing, linings for helmets, or protective gloves. Given the vast number of feral and street cats, their skins represented a readily available resource. It is a sobering thought that the very creature cherished by a little girl in a poem might later provide warmth for a soldier's hands on a cold northern frontier. This was not an act of cruelty, but one of brutal efficiency, a complete use of an available material in a world without synthetic fabrics. The use of cats extended even to the written word. The thinnest, most delicate parchment, known as vellum, was sometimes made from the skins of very young animals. While calfskin was the standard, the skins of cats or rabbits could be used for smaller, less formal documents or for practice scrolls. A scholar's notes or a merchant's accounts might literally be inscribed on the skin of the animal that once prowled his storeroom. This practice is confirmed by modern analysis, where microscopic examination of ancient parchment fragments can identify the animal source, sometimes revealing this startling origin. Beyond material uses, cats were also part of the Roman folk medicinal arsenal. Pliny the Elder, that great compiler of natural knowledge, recorded several such remedies. He suggested that ashes from a burnt cat's head could be applied to alleviate toothaches, or that specific parts of the animal might be used in poultices. We must understand that this was not malicious, but born from a pre-scientific worldview that sought cures in all of nature's offerings, however strange they seem to us now. The Roman relationship with the cat was thus a complete cycle. In life, it was a hunter, a companion, and a symbol. In death, its skin could clothe a hand, its body could become a page for words, and its ashes might soothe the pain. This is the ultimate complexity, a world where a creature could be buried with tender care by one person and transformed into a tool by another, all within the same city walls. How do we reconcile such contrasting truths? We must accept that for the Romans there was no contradiction. Respect, utility, and even a form of love coexisted with a harsh, unflinching practicality that defined their entire world. Yet this world of quiet burials and domestic companionship existed alongside a far more brutal stage, the roaring amphitheater. The Roman games were a spectacle of power, and their central event was the venatio, the wild beast hunt. While lions and leopards imported from Africa were the star attractions, the demand for exotic creatures was insatiable. To fill the sand with movement and terror, organizers would use any animal they could capture, including the smaller wildcats native to the Italian forests and even the large, feral descendants of domestic cats. Imagine the scene for a moment. A cat that once hunted mice in a granary now finds itself released from a dark tunnel into the blinding light of the arena, confronted by the roaring of 50,000 spectators and a professional hunter, the bestiarius, armed with spears and arrows. For the crowd, this was not a tragedy, it was thrilling entertainment. a demonstration of human dominance over the wild world in all its forms, from the mightiest lion to the most common wildcat. The same creature revered as a symbol of liberty and a philosopher's metaphor was, in this context, reduced to a moving target, a piece of living scenery to be slaughtered for public amusement. This is the ultimate paradox of the Roman cat. It could be a cherished companion in one home and disposable spectacle filler just a few streets away. The cat's life was entirely defined by context, its value shifting from a respected household guardian to a pawn in a bloody public drama, all within the same city walls. How do we reconcile such a stark contrast? We must accept that Roman society held these dualities without conflict, seeing no contradiction between a private affection and a public brutality that served the greater spectacle of the state. The word they use for this complex creature is itself a clue to its identity. The most common Latin term was felis or felis. This ancient word echoes through time, giving us our modern scientific term, feline. But felis was more than just a name. It carried a sense of the animal's essential nature, its wildness and its hunting prowess. It was the word for the creature in its classical role, the mouser in the granary and the symbol of liberty. Then as the empire aged, a new word began to creep into common usage, catus. This term feels different on the tongue, sharper and more direct. It holds no echoes of wild goddesses or philosophical ideals. Catus is a practical, almost blunt word, and it is the direct ancestor of cat in English, chat in French, and gatto in Italian. Why did this new word appear? A linguistic shift on this scale rarely happens by accident. One compelling theory points to the Roman legions stationed along the Rhine and Danube frontiers. Here, Roman soldiers would have encountered Germanic tribes who used a word like catus. As cultures mixed, this new, simpler term might have been adopted by the common soldier and then carried back across the empire, gradually supplanting the older, more formal feels in everyday speech. This suggests a profound change in perception. The cat was becoming less of a symbolic feels and more of a universal catus, a standardized creature known to everyone, its identity now detached from its old Roman roots and integrated into the common lexicon of a changing Europe. The very word we use today is a fossil from the late Roman world, a lasting whisper from an era when the cat shed its last mythological skin to become the everyday companion we recognize. But the cat did not rule the rodent world without competition. Imagine a Roman merchant faced with a warehouse teeming with rats, considering his options. He could rely on the cats that wandered the docks, but he might also turn to a more specialized and perhaps more controversial employee, the ferret. The Romans knew these animals well, calling them viveri, and they recognized their formidable hunting skills. Unlike the independent cat, a ferret was a tool that required active management. A handler would literally put the creature on a leash and guide it into a grain storage room or a ship's hold, directing its frantic, sinuous energy toward the nests of rodents. The ferret was a precision instrument, a targeted solution for a known infestation. In some ways it was superior. Its long, slender body could plunge into burrows and tight spaces a cat could never reach, flushing out entire families of rats and mice in a single, chaotic raid. Yet this very strength was also its greatest weakness. A ferret is a creature of intense, almost frantic focus, difficult to control and prone to nipping its handler. It lacked the cat's calm self-sufficiency. You could not simply release a ferret into a granary and expect it to maintain a long-term, peaceful patrol. It was a weapon to be deployed for a specific mission, not a permanent, low-maintenance guardian. Weasels were also present in this world of small hunters, though they were far less manageable than even the ferret. Wild and notoriously difficult to tame, a weasel was more of a chance ally than a domesticated employee. It might move into a barn on its own accord and provide excellent pest control, but it could never be relied upon or directed. So why did the cat ultimately win this ancient economic contest? The answer lies in the perfect balance of traits. The cat was the superior long-term investment. It required no leash, no handler, and no special feeding as it sustained itself on its prey. It was agile enough to climb into the rafters of a warehouse and patient enough to wait in silent ambush for hours. A cat was a self-replicating, autonomous security system. A merchant did not need to purchase and train a new cat every season. The existing population would naturally maintain itself. This economic calculation was undeniable. The cat provided a continuous free service, while a ferret represented a recurring expense and a management challenge. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, saw the numbers clearly. The cat had earned its place not through divine favor or overwhelming power, but by being the most cost-effective, efficient, and manageable solution to one of the empire's most persistent problems. Did a Roman legionary ever reach down to scratch the ears of a camp cat? While no surviving military manual explicitly lists a cat among the standard issue equipment for a soldier, the sheer logistical necessity makes their presence almost a certainty. Think about the scale of a Roman military camp, a temporary city of thousands of men. Their most vital asset after their weapons was their food supply, vast stores of grain and salted meats that were a beacon for every rodent for miles around. An infestation of rats could decimate the legion's bread rations in a matter of days, leading to starvation, desertion, and defeat. The army needed a solution that was silent, required no pay, and worked through the night. The cat was the perfect candidate. There is no record of a centralized military program to procure cats, but their organic presence is all but guaranteed. Consider the archaeological evidence we touched on earlier, those small cat bones and preserved paw prints found at frontier forts like Vindolanda in Britain. These are not the remains of wild animals, but of creatures that lived and died within the confines of the camp. They were the unofficial furry guardians of the granary and the barracks. And what about the Roman Navy, those ships that patrolled the entire Mediterranean? A vessel at sea was a sealed environment, a floating buffet for rats. Without cats to patrol the holds, a ship's crucial supplies of food and drinking water could be contaminated or utterly consumed before it reached its destination. Every creak in the dark would have been a reminder of the need for a skilled hunter on board. It stretches credibility to believe that seasoned sailors and soldiers, who understood the threat of vermin better than anyone, would have ignored such a simple and effective solution. They almost certainly encouraged these natural predators to live among them, turning a blind eye to a few extra scraps of food in exchange for the security of their rations. So while we may never find a tombstone for legionary felines, the evidence of need, of practicality, and of those silent bones in the soil paints a compelling picture of the cat as an essential, if unsung, member of the Roman war machine. That quiet paw print in a British fort tile tells a story of empire. The Roman cat was not confined to the Italian peninsula. It was a citizen of the world, traveling with legionaries and merchants to the farthest, foggiest corners of the known world. In Britannia, before the Romans arrived, there is little evidence for domestic cats. The native wildcats kept to the deep forests, avoiding human contact. The Romans brought with them a new idea, the concept of a cat as a working partner in settled, agricultural life. At the settlement of Vindolanda, just south of Hadrian's Wall, archaeologists have found those poignant cat bones amidst the military barracks. This was not a native British animal, it was a Roman import, a silent comrade brought to protect the grain stores of the northernmost legions from the relentless local rodents. The local Britons would have seen these creatures for the first time, these efficient, self-possessed animals that thrived in the bustling Roman towns. It was a small but profound cultural transfer, the introduction of the domestic cat to Britain, a legacy that would outlast the empire itself. In Gaul, modern-day France, the interaction was different. The Gauls already had a complex relationship with animals, with boars and stags featuring prominently in their art and religion. They were skilled farmers and lived in large fortified settlements called oppida, which would have suffered from the same rodent problems as Roman towns. When the Romans arrived, they did not necessarily need to introduce the cat, but they certainly normalized its specific role as an urban and military pest controller. The Roman army in Gaul operated vast supply networks with Horea granaries built to a standard design from the Rhineland to the Atlantic coast. In these state-run facilities, the presence of cats became part of the standard operating procedure, a best practice exported across the province. The Gallo-Roman population, living in newly Romanized cities, would have adopted this practical approach, blending it with their own existing knowledge of animal husbandry. But what about a province like Egypt, where the cat was already a goddess? Here, the cultural flow reversed. Romans living in Egypt were immersed in a society that had worshipped felines for millennia. They walked past temples to Bastet. They saw the mummified cats sold as offerings to the gods. it was impossible to remain entirely detached from this profound reverence. While a Roman merchant from Ostia might initially scoff at the idea of a divine cat, living daily in that environment surely softened his purely pragmatic view. There is evidence that some Romans in Egypt began to adopt local customs, perhaps treating their own cats with a new level of respect, or even participating in the rituals at Bastet's temples. They may have sent mummified cats back to relatives in Rome as exotic curiosities, inadvertently introducing a sliver of Egyptian spirituality into the heart of the empire. So the story of the provincial cat is one of adaptation and exchange. In the northern provinces, Rome exported the very concept of the domestic cat. In a place like Egypt, it was Rome that was influenced, its hard-edged pragmatism gently challenged by an ancient tradition of feline veneration. This back and forth created a truly imperial cat, a creature whose role and meaning were subtly reshaped in every port and fortress it inhabited, from the damp granaries of Britannia to the sun-baked temples of the Nile. Yet even as the cat solidified its role across the empire, the ground beneath its paws began to shift. The rise of Christianity introduced a new spiritual lens, one that viewed the old pagan world with deep suspicion. In this emerging worldview, what place was left for a creature so intimately tied to the old gods? The cat's long-standing association with liberty and the independent hunt, once admired Roman virtues, now risked being reinterpreted as something far more sinister. Independence could be seen as defiance, and a silent prowler in the night was no longer just a symbol of freedom, but a potential agent of darkness. Early church fathers, in their zeal to separate the faithful from pagan influences, often condemned the elaborate animal-headed deities of Egypt. While they rarely singled out cats directly, the general condemnation of animal worship cast a long shadow. The beloved Bastet was now demoted to a demon, and the creatures she once embodied were tainted by this association. A new question began to form in the twilight of the empire. If the old gods were false, then what were the animals they represented? This was not an immediate, empire-wide persecution of cats. Life went on in the granaries and on the farms, where practical needs still ruled the day, but a subtle cultural poison was seeping into the foundation of society. The respect born of pragmatism was slowly being eroded by a theology that demanded a clear line between the sacred and the profane, with little room for the ambiguous creature that lived in both worlds. The cat, which had navigated the complex spiritual landscape of Rome so deftly, now found itself on the wrong side of a new, rigid divide. Can you sense the turning of the tide? The stage was being set for a dramatic historical descent, where the Roman cat of the legions and the hearth would slowly transform into the suspected familiar of witches, its purr a whisper of a forgotten and now forbidden world. A shadow was falling over the Western world, and the cat stood directly in its path. The slow collapse of Roman order and the rise of Christianity did not just change politics, it rewrote the spiritual rules for every living creature. The cat's most celebrated qualities were now its greatest liabilities. Its cherished independence began to look like a refusal to submit to divine authority. Its flawless night vision and silent movements, once practical assets, now suggested a comfort with darkness that was deeply suspect. The creature that symbolized libertas was being recast as a servant of a new, terrifying master. Early Christian writers, the Church Fathers, spearheaded this ideological shift. While they did not launch a direct crusade against cats, their condemnations of pagan idolatry were devastating by association. St. Augustine himself, a towering figure whose theology shaped the medieval mind, wrote scathingly of the Egyptian animal cults. He mocked the idea of worshipping beasts, asking how anyone could pray to a god that, if it died, would leave its supplicant bereft. His primary target was the cult of the bull god Apis, but the logic was a sweeping indictment. If it was blasphemous to worship a bull, then it was equally blasphemous to venerate a cat. The divine feline of Egypt was, in this new light, nothing but a demonic deception. This theological framework created a climate where any animal linked to the old gods was spiritually dangerous. The cat's connection to Diana, goddess of the wild hunt, further sealed its fate. As Christianity sought to tame the wilderness and banish the old spirits of forest and field, Diana was demonized into a queen of witches. Her companion animal, the independent hunter of the night, naturally became the witch's familiar. A 6th century churchman, Pope Gregory the Great, illustrated this changing worldview in a famous story. He described a group of Roman nuns who were plagued by an evil spirit. This demon did not appear as a monster, but as a small, innocuous creature, a story that would have sent a subconscious shudder through any community that kept cats. The message was clear: the devil's work could be done through the most humble and familiar of forms. This was not yet a call to violence, but it was a potent seed of superstition. Can you feel the ground becoming unstable beneath the cat's paws? Its position in society was shifting from a respected, if ambiguous, partner to a potential enemy within the walls. The law, always a mirror of cultural fears, began to reflect this new anxiety. Centuries later, in the early medieval period, we see this suspicion codified. The laws of King Howell the Good in 10th century Wales set a specific price for various animals. A pet cat was valued at a single penny, but the price was conditional. To be worth even that meager sum, the cat had to be proven a capable hunter. Its eyes had to see clearly in the dark. Its claws had to be sharp and intact. If it failed in its duties, if it was a poor mouser, its value plummeted to nothing. The law demanded utility above all else, and a cat that did not serve its purpose was legally worthless. This was a far cry from the affectionate grave of a Roman child's companion. The medieval cat lived on a razor's edge, its worth contingent on its labor, its spiritual status shadowed by the ghosts of pagan gods. The stage was being set for a terrible transformation, where the whispers of heresy would one day erupt into the fires of the Inquisition. While the Western Roman Empire crumbled into legend, a different story was unfolding in the East. In Constantinople, the glorious capital of the Byzantine Empire, Roman law, culture, and tradition did not just survive, they thrived for another 1,000 years. And padding through the marble halls of the great palace and the vast shadowy granaries that fed the city, the Roman cat found a sanctuary. Its legacy continued here, not as a fading memory, but as a living, breathing part of a still great empire. The Byzantines inherited Rome's pragmatic spirit, and their colossal city, one of the largest in the world, faced the same eternal problem: an army of rodents threatening its food supply. The massive granaries and warehouses of Constantinople, some of the most sophisticated in the ancient world, would have been utterly dependent on feline guardians. It is almost certain that cats were not merely tolerated in these spaces, but actively encouraged as a vital component of urban infrastructure. They were the silent, efficient custodians of Constantinople's survival, a direct continuation of their role in old Rome. But did this practical partnership blossom into something more in the refined world of Byzantine culture? The evidence from art is subtle but telling. In exquisite Byzantine manuscripts illuminated with gold leaf and deep blues, we occasionally find cats depicted in the margins. They are not the hunters of Pompeian gardens, but often quieter presences, curled at the feet of scholarly saints or resting peacefully in domestic scenes. Their inclusion suggests a normalized, almost peaceful coexistence. One famous text, the Greek anthology, a collection of poems spanning centuries, even includes a short epitaph for a pet partridge killed by a house cat. The poem's tone is one of gentle lament, not fury at the cat, acknowledging it was simply following its nature. This reflects a society that understood and accepted the feline character. The most compelling legal evidence comes from the great Byzantine Emperor Justinian. His monumental law code, the Corpus Juris Civilis, which preserved and refined Roman law for the ages, also touched upon the animal world. While it didn't grant cats special status, its very existence created a stable, orderly society where the practical relationships of the past could endure. There is a fascinating, though later, account from the 11th century about a monastery on Mount Athos dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The story goes that the monastery was overrun with mice, threatening their food and sacred texts. In response, the monks were instructed to keep cats, and a specific breed, the agile Athos cat, became a permanent, revered feature of the monastic community. This tale, whether entirely factual or not, captures the Byzantine attitude, a seamless blend of spiritual duty and practical necessity, with the cat serving as a God-given solution. So in the East, the thread was never broken. The cat remained a respected partner, its role codified by continuous tradition rather than reinvented. This parallel history asks us a profound question: What became of the Western cat when the lights of Rome went out, and how different was the life of its eastern cousin, prowling the golden city on the Bosphorus, where the empire never fell? The ash that fell on Pompeii did more than preserve a city. It captured a single, ordinary afternoon for all time. This gives us our most intimate window into the daily reality of the Roman cat. We are not looking at grand statues or philosophical texts here, but at the quiet physical traces these animals left behind in a working town. In the volcanic material that buried Herculaneum, archaeologists have found the heartbreaking imprint of a cat's body, a hollow space in the hardened ash that once held a living creature. This ghostly feline form speaks not of a sacred beast or an arena victim, but of a town resident that shared the city's final terrible moments. Other, more subtle marks survive too. On a rooftop in Pompeii, paw prints were pressed into a drying roof tile, a moment frozen as the cat walked across the wet clay before it was fired in a kiln. This was not a deliberate memorial, but an accident, a tiny interruption in the daily business of construction that now tells us these animals were everywhere, walking across the very fabric of the city as it was being built. What do these silent prints tell us? They confirm that cats were integrated into the urban landscape, so common their footsteps were literally baked into the walls. They were part of the background noise of life, as mundane and essential as the cobblestones underfoot. The artistic record from these doomed cities adds another layer. We have already seen the cat in the Cave Canaan mosaic, but other homes reveal similar cameos. A fresco from the House of the Faun depicts a cat locked in a tense standoff with a bird, its body coiled with predatory focus. In another, a cat is shown playfully batting at a bundle of grapes. These are not portraits of gods, but observations of character and behavior. The artist saw these animals often enough to capture their essence with startling accuracy, the intense stare of the hunter and the curious swat of a playful companion. They were familiar enough to be decorative, but not so revered as to be the central subject. So where are the skeletons? This is where the story becomes complicated and deeply revealing. Excavations have uncovered the remains of dogs, horses, and even a pig in the stable of a villa, but complete cat skeletons from inside homes are surprisingly rare in Pompeii. This absence is itself a powerful piece of evidence. It suggests that during the eruption, most of the cats were exactly where their nature dictated they should be, outside. They were not family pets sheltered in the home, but free-roaming creatures that patrolled the streets, alleys, and gardens. They died in the open, their bodies likely scavenged or lost in the chaos. The few cat remains that have been found are often in commercial spaces, like the bakery where a cat's bones were discovered near the grain mill, still on the job until the very end. This microcosm of a Roman town presents a unified picture. The cat of Pompeii was a working animal, a permanent fixture of the urban ecosystem. It was appreciated for its skill, its form was immortalized in art, and its paws left marks on the city itself. Yet when the mountain exploded, it died as it lived, independent to the last, a creature of the city's bustling, shadowy spaces rather than the heart of the family home. This poignant snapshot from a city frozen in time confirms the complex, practical, and ultimately outdoor life of the average Roman cat. The cat's diet was written in its bones, a hidden record of scavenging and survival. Chemical analysis of feline skeletons from Roman sites reveals a story of remarkable adaptability. Isotopes locked within the bone collagen tell us these creatures were true opportunists, consuming a mix of whatever they could find. The primary signature is, unsurprisingly, a high level of nitrogen associated with a meat-based diet. They were eating mice, rats, sparrows, and lizards, the small creatures that thrived in the urban ecosystem. This was the core of their profession, the hunting that earned them their keep. But there is another, quieter story told by those same bones. Many cat remains also show a consistent intake of grains, specifically millet and wheat. A cat is a pure carnivore. It cannot derive nutrition from grains directly. So how did that grain get into its system? The answer lies in the stomachs of its prey and the kindness of humans. A mouse that had been feasting on spilled grain in a bakery would pass that chemical signature on to the cat that ate it. More directly, a person might have shared their own meal. A common Roman soldier's ration was pulmentum, a simple porridge made from wheat or millet, often served with scraps of salted fish or meat. A legionary feeling, a moment of companionship, might toss a bit of his fish-laced porridge to the camp cat. In a city apartment, a family finishing a meal of bread and olive paste might offer the crumbs and a few fish bones to the quiet creature by the door. The Roman diet was rich in fish sauce, garum, which was used on almost everything. The pungent, fishy scent of a garum-soaked scrap would have been irresistible to a feline. So the Roman cat lived on a dual income, so to speak. It earned its primary living through active pest control, but it supplemented this with a pension of table scraps, a gesture that blurred the line between a working animal and a tolerated guest. This diet paints a picture of a creature balanced between two worlds, its belly filled partly by its own skill and partly by the casual generosity of the empire it served. Their physical form was a testament to a life of purpose, not pampered breeding. The typical Roman cat was a lean, muscular creature, a far cry from the round-faced, fluffy pedigrees we know today. Think of the modern alley cat, the classic tabby, and you are close. The majority of evidence points to a short-haired coat, often displaying the distinctive striped pattern known as the mackerel tabby. This was not an aesthetic choice, but perfect camouflage for a life spent stalking through sun-dappled gardens and shadowy granaries. Their build was functional and rugged. Archaeological evidence from their skeletons reveals animals slightly larger and more robust than the average house cat of today, with strong jaw muscles and durable limbs built for pouncing and climbing. This was a body shaped by survival, by the daily demands of hunting and the constant negotiation of a dangerous urban world. These cats were living legacies of their dual heritage. They carried the genes of the imported domestic cats from the Middle East, but also the sturdier frame of the native European wildcat. This genetic mingling resulted in a creature that was both adaptable to human spaces and fiercely independent. Their ears were likely more prominent, their faces longer and more feral in appearance compared to the smushed faces of some modern breeds. Imagine looking into the eyes of a Roman cat. You would see a glint of the untamed forest, a reminder of the wild ancestry that still coursed through its veins. This was not a creature designed for a cushion, but for the rooftops and the rafters, a sleek and efficient hunter perfectly evolved for its role in the Roman world. The legacy of the Roman cat is written in the very words we use to name it. As the legions marched and merchant ships sailed, they carried the Latin term catus to the farthest provinces, a practical word that would slowly eclipse the older, more formal fields. This was more than a simple change in vocabulary, it was a linguistic fossilization of the animal's new role. Catus was the word of the common soldier and the farmer, the term for the working mouser, not the symbolic creature of poets. It traveled with the empire, taking root in local dialects and evolving over centuries into the chat of France, the gatto of Italy, and the cat of the English language. This linguistic journey mirrors the biological one, proving that the cat spread was a bottom-up phenomenon, driven by daily necessity and imperial connectivity. The Roman Empire provided the first truly continental network of roads, sea lanes, and settled towns that a small animal needed to travel and establish itself. Before Rome, domestic cats were largely confined to the Mediterranean basin, but the empire's granaries, ports, and military forts created a perfect, interconnected habitat for them to colonize. A cat born in a Syrian port could stow away on a grain ship bound for Hispania, disembark, and find a new home in the bustling Roman town of Tarraco. Its offspring might then travel with a legionary unit north into Gaul, and from there, a trader could carry the lineage across the channel to Londinium. This was not a deliberate breeding program, but a natural migration facilitated by human infrastructure. The Roman world, for the first time in European history, was a single, vast ecosystem. Where the legions built a fort, cats followed to guard the grain. Where a new city was founded, cats arrived to patrol its warehouses and homes. They became as much a part of the Roman footprint as the aqueduct or the paved road. When the Western Empire eventually fragmented, the cats did not disappear. They were already too deeply embedded, too essential to the agricultural and urban life that continued. The medieval villages and monasteries of Europe were thus already populated by the direct descendants of Roman cats. Their genetic legacy, that robust blend of domestic and wild traits, became the foundation for the entire feline population of the continent. So the next time you see a common tabby strolling through a European garden, you are not just looking at a pet, you are looking at the great-great-grandkitten of a Roman mouser, a living inheritance from the empire that first gave it a continent to call home. Their story is one of profound complexity, a creature defined by its utility rather than its divinity. The Roman cat was a living paradox, a pest controller in the granary, a quiet companion by the fire, and a silent omen in the night. It was a symbol of cherished liberty, yet a disposable pawn in the arena's spectacle. It could be buried with tender care by one person, while its skin was fashioned into gloves by another. This was not a relationship of simple worship like in Egypt, nor the later medieval fear of a witch's familiar. It was a uniquely Roman bond, built on a foundation of stark pragmatism that could, in private moments, bloom into genuine affection. These animals navigated the entire spectrum of Roman life, from the highest philosophical ideals to the most brutal realities of survival. They were not gods, but they were far more than mere beasts. Their legacy is the very cat that shares our homes today, a descendant of those rugged, resourceful creatures who hitched a ride on the ships and wagons of an empire. The next time your own cat gives you that familiar, inscrutable look, remember the ancient streets it once prowled. What part of this Roman legacy do you see in your own feline friend? Share your thoughts and any surprising facts in the comments below.